Thank you for coming. Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Harrington. I am the Berkshire District Attorney, and I wanted to be available to the media today to respond to whatever questions that I can in regards to an incident that occurred yesterday in Adams that started with a dog attack at 19 Bellevue Avenue in Adams and resulted in the death of an individual who resided at that address. I want to stress to everybody that this investigation is ongoing. I have not yet received any written police reports or information in regards to the investigation. I can share with you what information I do know that has been shared with me from the investigators. I did visit the scene yesterday. I was outside. I saw what happened outside of the home. At that time, the chemists for the State Police Crime Lab were inside the scene doing their work, so I did not have an opportunity to go into the house at this point. But I know that you probably have a lot of questions, and I'll tell you what it is that I can tell you. This investigation is being led by the State Police Detective Unit that is assigned to the District Attorney's Office. Detective Lieutenant Ed Culver is the lead investigator. He is at this moment at the office of the medical examiner in Westfield attending the autopsy of the individual who tragically died yesterday. That got delayed a little bit this morning due to the weather. Otherwise, he would be here with me as well. So I'm happy to take questions. Josh Landis. Can
you walk through the timeline of exactly what happened?
So there was a call that came into Adams PD around 12:09. There were multiple 911 calls, and what occurred is that there was a individual who resided at 19 Bellevue Terrace or Avenue. It's something like that. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what it is. There was an individual who resided there who owned, there are two dogs that live at that property. The information that we have is that there are two adult male pit bulls. One of them is named Max and one of them is named Derma. Max is known to be the more aggressive of the two, but they do have a history of aggression and they have a history of fighting, and our understanding is that they were kept in separate cages. So a neighbor heard a commotion that was occurring at 19 Bellevue and determined that the neighbor knew right away that this must be an incident with the dogs, rushed over to help. He could hear somebody screaming for help, saying, "Please shoot the dogs." The neighbor ran back to his own apartment and got a crossbow that he uses for hunting, which he has a license for, ran back with the crossbow, was at so the way the apartment is set up is there's a front door and then there's a staircase. The neighbor was at the bottom of the stairs, looking up the stairs. There was a pit bull at the top of the stairs on the landing. And pit bull was in front of a closed door. The gentleman had barricaded himself in the room trying to, we believe, protect himself from the dogs. The neighbor shot the crossbow, hit the dog in the scruff of the neck. The dog did not die, but the crossbow, it's a bolt, it's called a bolt, went through the door and unfortunately hit somebody behind the door. So that's somewhat the sequence of events. At that point, the dogs were still in the house fighting. The neighbor had an opportunity to call for help. Adams PD came on the scene. Two officers entered the house. One of them is the canine officer. The dogs were still in there. The dogs were fighting. The dogs came at the officers. The officers shot the dogs. One of them died in the house. The other continued out of the house and ran down the street. And I went to the scene last night. You can see in the street, you can see blood in the street from the dog. Another member of the Adams Police Department shot the dog again, and the dog died there in the street.
Were the dogs owned by the victim or somebody else?
So in the home, there are 2 adults who live in the home with a small child. It is our belief that one dog was owned by one adult and the other dog was owned by another adult. And the child was in the home while this was occurring. And we're just very grateful that she was not harmed physically in any way.
Can you say the relationship between the people in the home?
It's our understanding, they are the biological parents of the child who was in the home. It's our understanding that they were in a dating relationship.
And ma'am, you mentioned that the dogs had a history of aggressive behavior. Are we aware if they had attacked anyone before, if they had escaped at any point and caused a neighborhood nuisance?
We do know that the dog Max had previously attacked somebody in the home. That was in November of 2018, and the person who was attacked received medical attention.
Where's the child at this time?
I can't comment on that, but the child is safe.
And you mentioned that the person who was using this crossbow did have a license for it. Do we know at this time what type of crossbow it was and whether or not the pounds of pressure? I know that there is a law in Massachusetts of the types of crossbows you're allowed to have in possession of in the state. Or was it within legal limits for ownership?
My understanding is that the crossbow is legal and was whatever licensing is required was obtained, but right now investigators don't have any concerns that there was any issue with this person owning the crossbow.
Are there any dangerous dog laws? I mean, you hear this story about dangerous dogs. Dogs have attacked already, and then, here apparently the dogs have attacked again. What is the limitation on that? How far can that go?
Yeah, so in Massachusetts, most of the laws dealing with dogs have to do with civil liability. My understanding of Massachusetts law is that there is not a statewide statute that would impose criminal liability for owning a dangerous dog. That's my understanding at this point. In other jurisdictions, there have been cases that have found that a dangerous dog could be treated like a dangerous weapon. That theory has not been used in Massachusetts, to my knowledge.
Is it possible the other adult who owned one of these dogs, could they face any criminal liability here, being that their dog was involved in this attack that led to this tragic incident?
Given that the investigation is ongoing, I would just say for us answering that it would be premature.
Because the dogs were kept in 2 separate cages, do we know how they ended up getting out?
We do not know that at this time.
Within 24 hours, are you able to name the victim?
That's an excellent question. Right now, the autopsy is underway at the OCME's office in Westfield. I am not at liberty to disclose the name of the deceased individual because the OCME has not made an identification. And that's just, I don't think there's anything unusual. I think it's just because they're still doing their work. But as soon as we have an identification and the next of kin have been notified, we will absolutely alert the media as to the name of the deceased individual.
And what do the state or municipal laws allow for firing these types of projectiles in a residential area?
I am not aware of any specific laws about firing a crossbow in a residence. I think this was an emergency situation, and at this point, given that everything in the investigation indicates that the neighbor was reacting in a very stressful circumstance, was doing what he could to neutralize the dog to protect life. And at this point, I don't anticipate that this office would be filing any criminal charges against the neighbor, who by all accounts appears to be a good Samaritan and is very, very distraught over this circumstance. He was actually quite good friends with his neighbor, and he knew that there was a child in the home, and it was a really, really difficult and stressful situation for him to be in, and I think he did his best under the circumstances.
From start to finish, roughly how long did this ordeal last, since it really did end, from what you said, with police?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I can't answer that right now.
The gentleman, so you don't anticipate any involuntary manslaughter charges against the crossbow?
Not at this time. If, this is what our investigation has shown thus far. It's so, at this point, we don't anticipate charges against the neighbor with the crossbow, no.
Obviously, this is a fairly unusual case, but have you handled or have you seen incidents like this where somebody tries to, stop a dog or some sort of threat, and the bullet or in this case, the bolt goes through a door?
This is a very unusual case. This is why we were surprised by the fact pattern. It's not something that I've seen here in my first year in office or anything similar to what we've seen here. I think the investigators were pretty surprised by the factual scenario. It really is a chain of very, very unfortunate circumstances, and because of the unusual nature of the case, we anticipated that there would be some interest in it, which is why we've really been trying to be forthcoming about information and sharing with you information about this case.
And when do you expect the medical examiner to identify the party and release it? Today?
Yeah, I would think it would be today or tomorrow, I would hope. But for our work, when we're relying on other agencies to provide information, we can't make guarantees about the time frame, but I don't think that there's anything particularly complicated about making an identification in this case. So I think it would happen relatively soon.
And the officers that discharge their weapons, is there any procedural suspension or anything with that as the investigation goes on?
So yeah, there's not a procedural suspension, but because weapons were discharged, the State Police Detective Unit took this investigation over immediately, in addition to the fact that this was an unattended death, and my office has jurisdiction over unattended deaths, and the state police do handle those kinds of investigations. I will say that there was a necropsy done on the two dogs this morning, and they confirmed that 5 rounds were fired, which is consistent with what the ballistics evidence shows from the scene.
And do you have any just general safety advisories to people in regards to taking proper care or properly sheltering or sequestering their animals and to prevent a similar case?
Well, I would say that, owning dogs is a big responsibility, and, I wouldn't necessarily specify about particular breeds. I think that dogs from many different kinds of breeds can be aggressive, and for people who own dogs who are known to be aggressive, they're taking on a very big responsibility. And I think that people need to be cognizant of that fact, and they need to act accordingly. I would like to thank the Adams Police Department, Adams Animal Control for responding to the scene. I'd like to thank the State Police Detective Unit assigned to my office for leading this investigation. They also had assistance from the firearms section, the CSS section, which is Crime Scene Services. And I'd like to thank the Office of the Medical Examiner for their work and their help in this investigation. Thank you. No further questions.